Big budgets, massive hype, and then absolute disaster. In the world of gaming, money doesn't always mean masterpiece. Some titles had hundreds of millions behind them and still crashed harder than a day one server. These are the games that burned through fortunes and left behind nothing but disappointment and memes. Since no one cares about looking up failures, this video won't include timelines for the games mentioned. Unknown 9, Awakening, $80 million for a game no one wanted. The worst part of Awakening was that it was supposed to be the cornerstone of a transmedia universe that included novels, comics, podcasts, and even a potential series. But with the game flopping so hard, those plans were quickly shelved. What was meant to be the start of a grand franchise quietly became another forgotten entry in the list of overfunded failures. When Unknown was first teased at Gamescom years earlier, it piqued some curiosity. A narrative-driven sci-fi thriller about a young woman with supernatural powers tapping into a mysterious realm called The Fold sounded intriguing on paper. Backed by Reflector Entertainment, a subsidiary of Bandai Namco, and rumored to have an $80 million budget, it was meant to be the first step in a sprawling multimedia franchise. Despite the budget and ambition, Unknown 9, Awakening was plagued by a complete identity crisis. It tried to blend stealth, action, exploration, and metaphysical lore in one package. But none of it came together in a satisfying way. Players criticized its sluggish combat, generic level design, and a story that leaned far too heavily on exposition dumps and vague mysticism. Sales were disastrous. The game failed to chart on most platforms and had abysmal concurrent player counts from launch week. With virtually no marketing push in its final months, it felt like even the publisher had given up on it. Sony's Concord might go down as one of the fastest, most catastrophic implosions in AAA gaming history. Developed by Firewalk Studios under the PlayStation umbrella, this live-service hero shooter was meant to rival titans like Overwatch and Valorant, with a budget rumored to be between $200 million and $400 million. Concord was one of Sony's most ambitious multiplayer investments, and it crashed almost immediately. From its reveal, Concord faced widespread backlash. The reveal trailer was ridiculed online for its tone-deaf dialogue and uninspired sci-fi aesthetic, with many criticizing its clear lack of originality. Upon launch, the situation worsened. Players cited clunky gunplay, shallow hero design, and dull maps. What makes Concord's failure so staggering is the speed and severity of Sony's response. Within 2 weeks, the game was pulled from both PlayStation and PC storefronts. Refunds were issued proactively. Firewalk Studios was shut down, and support was terminated entirely. It was a rare and very public admission of failure from Sony, a company not known for abrupt reversals. If you're enjoying the video, a quick like would mean a lot and really helps the channel grow. Star Wars Outlaws, a galaxy-sized failure. With access to one of the most lucrative IPs in entertainment history and a reportedly massive development and marketing budget, estimated north of $100 million, Ubisoft had every reason to believe Star Wars Outlaws would be a surefire hit. This was the first open-world Star Wars game, promising thrilling space combat, criminal underworld exploration, and cinematic storytelling. But despite the potential and the hype, Outlaws landed with a thud. From launch, it was clear the game didn't deliver the experience fans hoped for. Many criticized the game's repetitive mission design, lifeless open-world segments, underwhelming RPG elements, and what some described as a checklist-driven approach to gameplay. Performance issues on PC and consoles didn't help either. Reports indicated the game sold just over 1 million copies in its first month. For a blockbuster release backed by Disney and Ubisoft, that figure was borderline disastrous. This outcome hits even harder considering Ubisoft's recent financial struggles and their pivot toward massive live service-style experiences. Outlaws was positioned as a prestige single-player title to offset those concerns, but it failed to move the needle. While not the worst game ever made, it couldn't justify its enormous cost or meet the lofty standards set by its own branding. Skull and Bones, the $800 million joke. Skull and Bones might be the most infamous development disaster in gaming history. Initially announced in 2017, this pirate-themed action game from Ubisoft took nearly a decade to launch. Along the way, it went through multiple reboots, shifted creative direction several times, and reportedly burned through an estimated $650 million to $850 million. A budget that would make it one of the most expensive games ever made. And when it finally arrived in 2024, it was dead on arrival. The core gameplay loop, centered around naval combat and looting, was labeled repetitive, shallow, and uninspired. fans expecting something akin to a spiritual successor to Assassin's Creed 4. Black Flag were instead met with a grindy, bloated experience, more concerned with live service mechanics than swashbuckling fun. Within weeks of launch, player counts had cratered. Making matters worse, Ubisoft leaned heavily into the live service angle, expecting Skull and Bones to become a long-term revenue stream. But the monetization model was seen as predatory, and post-launch support felt like an attempt to salvage a sinking ship. Players mocked the game on social media, and Skull and Blunders memes went viral across gaming communities. Today, Skull and Bones serves as a case study in development hell, scope creep, and what happens when a publisher refuses to pull the plug on a doomed project. When Redfall launched in May 2023, players were stunned, not by the vampire-infested streets of its fictional Massachusetts town, but by just how broken and uninspired the game was. Developed by Arcane Austin, the studio behind Prey and Dishonored, expectations were high. Microsoft had positioned Redfall as a key Game Pass exclusive, and with a reported budget of over $100 million, it was supposed to be one of the service's flagship titles. What followed was a catastrophic failure, commercially, critically, and creatively. From the get-go, Redfall was plagued with issues. Enemy AI was laughably bad. Performance was inconsistent even on high-end PCs and Xbox Series X, and the world design felt empty and repetitive. The game tried to blend open-world exploration, looter-shooter mechanics, and co-op gameplay, but none of it gelled. Fans were especially disappointed with the gunplay, bland mission structure, and the fact that the game required an online connection, even for solo play. The backlash was so intense that Xbox executives publicly apologized and promised better quality control going forward. Phil Spencer admitted in an interview that the game was a disappointment and took full responsibility for its state. Sales? Practically non-existent. Redfall struggled to retain even a modest player base on Game Pass and Steam. Within weeks, servers were barren. Any momentum it had going into launch was instantly wiped out by bad word of mouth and damning gameplay clips circulating on social media. By 2024, Arcane Austin was shuttered entirely, and support for Redfall was abandoned. The game received a few patches, but never a meaningful overhaul. What was supposed to be a bold new IP for Xbox turned into one of its most embarrassing misfires. Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League was supposed to be Rocksteady's triumphant return. After redefining superhero games with the Batman Arkham series, fans expected nothing short of brilliance. What they got instead was a bloated, confused, live service mess that not only flopped spectacularly, but might have put the final nail in the coffin for Rocksteady's golden era. With an estimated budget of $200 million to $300 million, Suicide Squad is one of the most expensive failures in gaming history. The red flags were there long before release. Previews showed a chaotic third-person shooter with RPG-like mechanics, loot tiers, and grinding missions, all of which clashed with what fans expected from a story-rich, character-driven Rocksteady game. The game was built as a live service title, complete with battle passes, cosmetic microtransactions, and seasonal content. But fans just didn't want that. They wanted a deep, narrative-driven superhero experience, not a looter-shooter with Harley Quinn wielding assault rifles. Upon release in early 2024, the backlash was immediate. Despite slick visuals and polished animations, the core gameplay was repetitive and downright boring. Sales were disastrous. Warner Bros. Reportedly took a $200 million loss on the game, citing it as a major factor in their disappointing quarterly results. Within a month, the active player count on Steam dropped to under 1,000 concurrent users. Rocksteady promised content updates and roadmap improvements, but the damage was done. The player base had already moved on. Even worse, the failure of Suicide Squad cast a long shadow over Rocksteady itself. Once hailed as one of the best studios in the business, their reputation took a major hit. Layoffs followed, and the live service roadmap was quietly scaled back. Square Enix and Luminous Productions invested over $100 million into Forespoken, a new IP meant to showcase the power of next-gen hardware and give players an epic, magical, open-world adventure. What they delivered, however, was a narrative and mechanical misfire that failed to meet both critical and commercial expectations, and left the studio behind it shut down within months of release. From the earliest trailers, Forespoken became a lightning rod for online mockery. Its dialogue, written by a team that included some high-profile Western writers, was widely ridiculed as cringy and out of touch. With the now infamous line, "I'm seeing freaking dragons," becoming a meme before launch. The protagonist Frey was meant to be relatable and grounded, but players found her awkward, smug, and poorly written. When the game launched in early 2023, the problems went deeper than the dialogue. The open world was vast, but felt empty, filled with repetitive encounters and uninspired side content. Commercially, Forespoken was a flop. Despite being one of the few big PlayStation 5 console exclusives at the time, it failed to recoup development costs. Square Enix publicly blamed lackluster performance for financial shortfalls in their fiscal year. And within weeks, Luminous Productions was folded into Square Enix entirely, effectively shutting down the team that had been groomed to carry the publisher into a new era. Saints Row 2022 rebooted and rejected. Volition's Saints Row reboot was supposed to breathe new life into a franchise that had run its course. Instead, it buried it for good. With a development and marketing budget exceeding $100 million, and a reception so toxic that the studio was shut down completely just a year later. If there's a modern textbook example of a reboot gone wrong, this is it. When Saints Row 2022 was announced, fans were skeptical. Gone were the outrageous antics and over-the-top chaos of previous entries, replaced by a more grounded tone and a cast of relatable millennial misfits. The edgy humor was swapped out for cringeworthy banter, and longtime fans were vocal. This wasn't their Saints Row. Instead of leaning into absurdity, the game tried to straddle a middle ground and please no one in the process. At launch, it was clear the game had serious problems. It was riddled with bugs, performance issues, and gameplay that felt a generation behind. Gunplay was clunky, driving felt unresponsive, and the mission design was painfully repetitive. Sales were just as grim. Despite a strong marketing push, Saints Row drastically underperformed at retail and digital storefronts. By August 2023, Embracer shut down Volition after nearly 30 years of development history. A beloved studio with a legacy dating back to Descent and Red Faction was gone, largely due to the failure of Saints Row. It was a brutal, sobering end to a once vibrant franchise and team. What went wrong? A complete misunderstanding of what fans loved about the series. Dragon Age The Veilgard. The Veilgard was supposed to be the return of one of BioWare's most beloved franchises, an epic fantasy RPG that would restore the studio's legacy after years of missteps. Instead, what they got felt like a stripped-down, corporatized imitation of what made the series shit. And for a game that allegedly cost over $100 million to develop, the end result didn't just miss the mark. It left fans wondering what happened to the soul of Dragon Age. From the moment Veilgard was revealed, longtime players raised red flags. Post-launch, the backlash intensified. Fans flooded social media and forums with critiques. Shallow dialogue trees, limited exploration, and overly simplistic skill trees. No, it feels like they made this for people who've never played a Dragon Age game, became a common refrain. Some even said it resembled a generic third-person action title with a Dragon Age skin. From the player's perspective, the Veilgard was a betrayal. Avowed, 100 million of mid. Avowed was supposed to be Obsidian's answer to the Elder Scrolls. Built with an estimated budget of over $100 million, the game promised deep fantasy RPG storytelling set in the universe of Pillars of Eternity, with first-person combat, magic, branching dialogue, and rich lore. And for fans of Obsidian's past masterpieces like Fallout, New Vegas, and The Outer Worlds, the hype was real. Unfortunately, the result was painfully average. When Avowed finally launched in early 2025, the reception was a collective shrug. While technically functional and polished, the game lacked the depth and charm Obsidian is known for. Combat was described as floaty and uninspired, with spellcasting and melee feeling weightless. The world design, though visually decent, lacked the density or intrigue seen in genre standouts. And worst of all, the writing, typically Obsidian's strongest asset, felt neutered and surface level. Critics gave Avowed scores in the mid-70s, praising the art style and potential, but bemoaning the shallow systems, lack of player choice, and underdeveloped characters. Players were even less forgiving, with many labeling it Oblivion Light or Game Pass filler. For a game meant to be Xbox's prestige RPG release, this wasn't just disappointing, it was embarrassing. Sales were modest at best, and Game Pass didn't help. While Xbox touted engagement numbers, insiders reported the game had far lower retention than expected, with most players dropping off after just a few hours. It lacked the must-play factor needed to keep audiences hooked, and post-launch buzz evaporated almost instantly. In the end, Avowed is a prime example of how even competent games can fail when expectations, scope, and execution don't align.